Welcome to The Beam Show, the show where we discuss topics on mental health, well-being and personal development. We are your hosts, Lianne, and myself, Tom Weaver, and these discussions come from our experience in training, the therapy room, and our personal experience. Today, we're going to talk about Mental Health Awareness Week, and the theme for 2024 is movement and moving more for our mental health. So, Lianne, have you done your 10,000 steps today?
I couldn't tell you, Tom. And I always find it quite funny. So walking 10,000 steps is generally, if you ask people how many steps they should be moving in a day, they generally say 10,000. And the fact is that there's no scientific evidence for that at all. It actually came from a Japanese company that created a really successful pedometer. And what they called it translated into 10,000 steps. And that just became a rule of thumb for the number of steps we're meant to use. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong if you're getting your 10,000 steps in, and that's a really good number and it's a great target. But for some people, 10,000 steps feels really big and it kind of demotivates them. And so what I find interesting is that there is some scientific research in the number of steps we should take. And it's not as bad as 10,000.
What do you mean it's not as bad?
You don't have to walk quite as far. You don't have to do quite as many. So there's research talked about by Dr. Kelly McGonigal in her book called The Joy of Movement. Dr. Kelly McGonigal. And that book, she kind of talks about how movement is so good, not just for our bodies, but also our mental health. And she refers to a study where they looked at the number of steps someone needs to take for optimal well-being. So they took people with low to moderate anxiety and depression, and some of them were put on medication, and some of them were asked to increase their steps. And what they found was once people started hitting a certain step count, their mental health improved equivalent to those taking the medication. So they tended to have a decrease in anxiety and depression and an increase in sense of purpose. And that was experienced by about 88% of the group. So really amazing results. And that magic step number was 5,649 steps a day. And I think that's a really good rule of thumb for people to start off with the idea of moving more, because it's a lot less than 10,000. So if you're not moving very much at all, it's a good goal.
Yeah, I think that's that sort of 5,500 steps. That equates to about 2.4 kilometers.
Which isn't that much, is it?
No, it really isn't. Or it might be 2.4 miles. I can't remember, but either way, it sounds far if you were to walk in a straight line.
Yeah.
But throughout the day, that really isn't that much.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is the last figures I looked at in the UK, the average step count was about 4,000.
Yeah.
So many of us are still not even hitting that 5,649. And so I think it's really important to mention that this study was done on people with low to moderate anxiety and depression. So we're not saying that, oh, if you're depressed, just go for a walk and you're going to feel better and it's going to fix everything.
It will help though.
But definitely, the research shows that it definitely helps. And I think there's a book behind you there by someone called Dr. John Medina, who looks a lot into movement and mental health and how kind of we've evolved over years. And he says from his studies that our brain was designed for us to walk 12 miles a day.
Wow.
Which so few of us are doing anything like that. No, I can't do that either. No. But so few of us are doing anything near that. And we kind of forget that this organ in our heads requires so much blood and oxygen for it to work optimally. And if we're sat down, that's just not happening. You know, it's in his book, he talks about how really your brain should only be sedentary if we're eating or sleeping. Other than that, our body should be moving and our brain should be getting a really fresh supply of oxygen constantly. But most of us do sedentary jobs now, and that's really difficult for us to achieve.
That's right. Like, I know we've spoke a lot about this. You can go to the gym first thing in the morning and you can do a nice workout for an hour. You can definitely, and that is fantastic. But then if you come back and you spend the rest of the day at a desk, not moving, and then you are still predominantly sedentary.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that, don't do that, because that workout in the morning is still fantastic. You it's a great way to move your body. But I think having, like, spreading that out throughout the whole day, if you are sat at your desk and you realize that you've been really focused in work for an hour, get up and move around, go get a drink or go to the toilet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we kind of forget, because we're conditioned to be sat in front of a screen quite a lot, and time just flies. And many of us feel that we're too busy and we've got to just stay and finish whatever we're working on. And we kind of forget that this machine is kinetic. Like, it works better when it's moving. It doesn't work so well when it's stationary. And then we only start to notice when things start to go wrong. So, hunched over a computer, your shoulders start to ache, or you might start to get lower back problems, or you might start to feel like lacking energy in other areas of your life. And we don't always associate that with how much have I moved in the day. And I really love the fact that this theme is something that we've actually talked about for years. It's mentioned in 2 of my books, Interrupting Anxiety and Radical Self-Care. It's the concept of well done. It's the
I was
concept.
prepared.
It's the concept of movement, not exercise. And we all know exercise is good for us, and we're absolutely not saying, you don't need to exercise. But as you're saying, if you exercise 1 in 24 hours and the other 23 are fairly sedentary, you're probably still not going to be as healthy as you could be. And I think recent statistics are that about 70% of us are predominantly sedentary. We're spending a massive part of our day, something like 6.9 hours a day, being sedentary, which is huge, and it has a huge impact. And we tend to think of it as very physical, but I love that this conversation is being had, that it's not just physical, it's mental. And I know both of us have had our own experience of that as well.
I think that, that it's so easy to blame technology, but we can also use technology to help us in a way. Like, I remember it was a couple of years ago that we both bought Apple Watches, and there's loads of different devices that you can get that will track your movement and definitely your steps, but they're getting so accurate now. And even having, I remember my first Fitbit watch, and that was years and years ago, before you could do everything off your watch, and they then would have a reminder. I think you could set reminders of to tell you when to get up and move around, and then it would prompt you to move for a couple of minutes, whether that was jumping up on the spot or doing a certain amount of steps before you went back to being still. And I think that we can use technology as a positive, to sort of counteract the negative. So because everything is so easily tracked now, and even if you just have your phone in your pocket, you can still roughly measure how many steps you're taking in a day. And
see,
I know it's not.
My thought on that, though, Tom, is when we got our Apple Watches, we were kind of tracking our sleep, tracking our steps, tracking our heart rate. And the reason we got it actually was I was really quite poorly at the time, and I found that really helpful.
It was really positive.
It was, until it becomes negative. And I definitely had an experience with my Apple Watch of kind of feeling like it was telling me how I was feeling. So say the tracking of sleep, for example, I would perhaps wake up and think, oh, that was quite a good sleep. And then I would look and I'd get 82% or something. And I'd think, oh, and I'd feel like that would then kind of mentally make me think I didn't get a good sleep. So now I'm going to be tired. And the same with the steps. Like quite often I remember us going out for the day once and we were exploring and we did loads of walking, and I was really quite grumpy because I'd forgotten to put my watch on, and I felt like, well, this is a waste of time, it's not being tracked.
But yeah, I mean, there is that. I do also remember you would look and be like, oh, I've done 10,000 steps, and then we walked everywhere and we did everything the same together, but then I would have walked 12,000 steps. And
why is that?
And you always put it down to me having shorter legs than you. And I did think, well, it's not really possible for my legs aren't that much shorter. Like, well, it's only an inch different in height, just for the record. And and that doesn't mean that I would do 20% more steps than you. I found it very useful to be able to track. And going back to what you were saying about sleep, I always felt that I was getting really good sleep. I mean, I know that we tackled night breathing as well, and that's a whole nother podcast. But I always felt like you were cheating when it came to sleep and it was recording, because you sleep
so
like
competitive.
You sleep like a Disney princess, and you know that. Like, don't move, wake up, and you know your hair is perfect. I look like I've had a fight with a bear whilst I sleep. And so I move around quite a lot, and I'm sure that if we did sleep studies, I'm sure that would come up with loads of other things that I need to address. But for the purpose of tracking our sleep with those with the smart devices, I felt like you had a hack because you were a really calm sleeper. But then we would get, like, you know, my sleep scores would be quite bad. And then so then I can see where there would be the negative about it. But what I'm trying to get at is those watches in the start, and definitely for, I'd say, about 12 months of us wearing it, really motivated us to, okay, I can see that I've only done 2,000 steps today. Let's go for a walk around the park, or, you know, take the dog out, or go to the shop, but we'll do it on foot instead. And I think it's still encouraged a behavior that we still do now. And say if we're going to the supermarket, I really try and park as far away from the entrance as possible, because then if I know that I haven't been very active, okay, well, I don't need to park really, really close. I can't, you know, even if it's raining, I can park really far away. And then I'm getting a walk in, I'm walking around the shop as well. So it was just trying to encourage me to move more throughout the day. And I think it's too easy to see how many steps that you've done. And, you know, I think it's that was the positive that I took from it. I know there is that competitive element. And I know that a lot of those smartwatches, they did have, and I know with Apple in particular, there was that competitive mode where you can compete against friends for movement throughout the week. And again, I think that is also brilliant, because it's like, okay, well, I can see that my friend or partner or colleague has moved. They've done 10,000 steps today, so I think I'll go and hit the gym, or I'll go for a long walk. And I can't see that there is any bad in that.
So I agree to some degree, but obviously I don't agree completely, because one of the biggest issues I see when talking about particularly mental health and physical health as a kind of byproduct of that is that we've become almost detached from ourselves. And I think having a device on our wrist, which is telling us to move, telling us that we should move more, telling us that we should sleep better, it kind of takes us away from our innate ability to recognize that. And I think, I mean, I wore the Apple Watch for probably about a year.
Yeah.
And then we sold them because it was like, okay, I've realized kind of where my blind spots are. I realize where I need to be moving more or change my sleeping habits. And I used it for that. And I found it really useful as a almost diagnostic. But then once I had made those behavior changes and I'd listened to my body more, I kind of thought, that's okay. I don't need a device to tell me that as much anymore. I can just recognize in myself, oh my goodness, I've been sat at the computer all day. I feel really sluggish. My back feels stiff. I feel really tired. I know that means I need to move. And so kind of it, the danger for me with that sort of element of technology is that we stop listening to ourselves.
Yeah, like I think so, but without that year of where I don't know why I'm advocating so much for the smartwatch. I just think that year of introducing those new positive habits then have led to long-term changes. And okay, we haven't wore a smartwatch now. I like to wear my dumb watch, which just tells the time, and I think that's great. But those habits that we introduced because of that technology, I think created long-term changes for us, which is good. And I think, then we found that actually we enjoyed movement in lots of different ways, rather than, because we both were signed up to a gym, and we went, and you go there and it's like it's banging dance music, and it's dark and it's windowless and it smells a bit funky, and you go on a machine and chances are you're listening to a podcast or music whilst you're doing it. And again, that's a very detached part as well. So I think what we found during that time, we live in Wales, so it rains a lot, but the times that we were able to get out and go walk around the woods or some of the lovely parks, then that felt so much better, even in times where maybe our mental health was a little bit lower than sort of normal. If we were going through a challenging time, then actually there was something really refreshing and really sort of relaxing and calming about going outside, because it's totally different to the gym. And I know that you can go and lift weights, but if you're taking a challenging hike, there are lots of benefits for that as well. But I think the overriding benefit is you are moving your body, you are being outside, so you're stimulated in a totally different way. Because if you're doing that with a friend or a partner or even a colleague, then you're going to be having conversations, but you're also going to be in nature. And I know that you'll be able to share why doing that sort of exercise in nature is really good for you.
Yeah, it's called green exercise.
Yeah.
Which I love, and I talk about it a bit in Interrupting Anxiety. And it's research that has kind of found that doing an hour at the gym or an hour outdoors, that impacts on our mental health is very different. So if we do an hour of outdoor exercise, essentially getting green exercise, so particularly if you can, like you said, go to a park or get out to the woods or the beach or the mountains or wherever it is around you, if you can get somewhere that is green or essentially more nature balanced, then heart rate goes down, blood pressure goes down. We get that sense of space, the sense of relaxation. And definitely for me, I mean, we did the gym for probably about 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
And for me, it was almost like overstimulating. Like you say, the banging dance music, it's dark. There's like people perhaps waiting for your machine or people just taking loads of selfies. And
it sounds more like a club night when you do it,
And it's really annoying if you're trying to listen to a podcast.
Yeah. Or an audio book or something. Yeah.
And you've just got boom, 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 boom. So yeah, for me, I completely agree. And I cancelled my gym membership whilst I was actually moving a lot more. So it wasn't, oh, I've just given up, you know, that kind of stereotype we have of paying for your gym membership and not going. It was definitely embracing the idea of movement. So again, going back to that, you know, for many people, the idea of exercise conjures images of doing it at school and being forced to do cross country or hockey and as you know, Tom, I hated all of that. Like I learned to forge my parents' signature at the age of 11, and I excused myself from pretty much every PE class there on in. So I always had a bad period or a bad knee or something that meant, and my school reports are really funny because to this day, if I find one of them and I see it, it's like, we can't grade Lianne for her PE because she was unable to do it this year.
this year. I mean, that's where we are totally different.
Very different.
I loved sport throughout school. Like the whole sort of time I was at school, from primary to secondary school, even when I went to college as well. Like I loved being a part of team sports. That then developed, I think, into sort of solo sport as well, because, you know, I think always having to do a sport when someone else was doing it, I think pushed my boundaries a little bit. But to be able to you know, do any type of movement when it was on my own, like, you know, whether that was going climbing, or I got into skating, skateboarding or rollerblading when I was a youngster. I don't do that anymore. I think there's it's no longer cool to rollerblade, is it? So but
not when you're nearly 40.
So I really enjoyed all types of movement. So, and I think that I was really lucky because I had quite well, apart from my mum, I had a very sporty family as well. So it was always encouraged, whether that was a five-a-side or going swimming or, you know, snowboarding or rock climbing. There was always something. So then it always made movement fun. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I think that's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is if it's fun. Like, I mean, the story I always tell is I've got two big brothers who were amazing at sport, and they won loads of competitions and they were captain of different things. When I went into secondary school and they realised who my brothers were, and I've always been really tall and slim, it was just assumed I would be as good athletically as my brothers. And I always say that they, particularly my eldest brother, he ran like just Usain Bolt. He was just such a sprinter. He was really fast. And they assumed I'd do the same. And I run like Phoebe from Friends with my arms flailing.
I think that was back then, though, because I have seen you run as an adult. And I didn't fall on the floor laughing. So I think that may be a little bit of a limiting belief.
Definitely.
From your childhood, and maybe what others told you look like.
Well, that's the point. Yeah, because the teacher literally laughed when I came in last and said, "Oh, you're not like your brothers." So that was kind of when I decided to learn to forge my parents' signatures. So yeah.
So
and
actually,
I think I
was going to say that's really important then, because that lack of encouragement back then caused you to opt out.
It caused me to think I hated exercise. And what I hated was being forced to exercise in school in a way that I didn't want to do it. Yeah. And it took me until well into being an adult for me to realize that saying I hate exercise is like saying I hate food. It's like there will be something that you like. You've just got to find what it is that you like, because there's such a broad range. And so for me, predominantly, what I love is yoga and dance and walking. Like, that's how I like moving my body. And it took me a long time to find that.
Yeah, I think that's when you find what it is you like, then it becomes really easy to keep doing it. Which sort of brings me on to like another topic when it comes to movement, because it's something that I've struggled with, definitely getting a little bit closer to 40. I don't feel like my body is getting older. I just have sort of reached different limitations. And I think this is something that maybe a lot of guys go through, because you know, as a 20-something, I could, you know, go out the night before, wake up, and then, you know, like do something sporty. If my sleep's been affected now, then I'm not going to want to be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
And you know, I was recently injured after being inspired, and you know, I'm always up for a challenge, and I definitely like to do forms of exercise that make me feel like I've earned it. You know, definitely feel inspired by watching something like SAS Who Dares, and actually, in reality, you shouldn't just be going from zero to training like someone that's preparing for the SAS. And that is what definitely I came to realize more about myself in the last few months, because earlier this year, I decided to load up a rucksack with a 20-kilo bag of sand and then go on a 5K hike. And I thought, you know, I spoke to a couple of people and they were like, yeah, yes. You know, none of them advised, actually, as a bit of a disclaimer, the friends that advised me never actually said, load up your bag with 20 kilos. I just thought, I'll go buy a bag of sand. And, you know, it was either, because, you know, if you go to Builder's Merchant, you can buy a 5-kilo bag of something, which is more expensive, but it was like two quid to buy a 20-kilo bag of sand. So I chucked that, and I didn't want to open it and spill it in my rucksack. So chucked that in and did a 5K hike. And I thought I did it. I was aching a little bit. I did think at one point I'll hide it in a bush and come get it with a car. But I went on that 5K hike. It was a pretty flat one, but I thought, yeah, this is a way to engage a lot more of my body whilst I am going on a walk. And I thought it was more of a challenge. And what happened about a few days later is my body was showing signs of real discomfort. And after having to go to the doctors, going to the physio, I created quite painful sciatic nerve pain from a compressed disc. And if anyone has ever experienced sciatic pain, it is horrible. And that put me out of action for about 6 weeks. And then, you know, probably longer, actually, thinking about light duties and not carrying around stuff and being really conscious about how I get in and out of a car. But what I found from doing that and causing that injury is that I got really excited about doing a different type of sort of exercise, and I dived straight into it without building myself up. And what I should have done was just maybe load a rucksack with a couple of books, or, you know, something that was sort of less than 5 kilos, maybe even about 2 kilos, just like the weight of like a normal rucksack that's got some stuff in it. And then I should have built it up over a period of time whilst I got used to it, and then worked on different parts of my body to build strength there as well. But I didn't. I dived straight into it after doing nothing, and then I caused myself injury, meaning that I wasn't able to move. And I think that's the word of warning is, you know, if you're listening to this, or if you've been inspired by this week of looking after your mental health, and think, yeah, I've just seen the hardest geezer. He's ran the whole length of Africa. I'm going to do it too. And if you've never run a marathon, you've never even run a 5K, then don't jump into running the length of Africa. I think it's really important to know that actually you need to build up to things. And, you know, that example of the hardest geezer, he'd run other marathons. He ran from Istanbul to London before. It wasn't his first go when he did that. So I think it's really important to not overdo it, because it's so easy to overdo exercise.
Yeah, I think something to come back to there, and I won't give my personal opinion on what you did, because I think I've told you enough.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I can edit bleeps into it. So yeah, carry on.
But I think, given this is, you know, talking about movement and mental health, and what you did forced you, and when you say to be fairly inactive for 6 weeks, I mean, you could barely do anything for 6 weeks. And I think it would probably be useful to just kind of understand how you trying to like do something good for your body and create movement and know how good that could be for your mental health. Actually, by overdoing it, what did that do to your mental health then?
I suffered more, because I was then bound to, we had to bring in like one of the comfy chairs and put it in the living room. Like, it was totally out of place. I had like tables set up around me. The meds that I had to take to relieve the pain meant that I couldn't even focus on work, or even recover in a way where I could have just read. And I think that made me pretty miserable. That sick. Well, it was 4 weeks of it being really bad.
Yeah.
And that, not even just being able to. It was when the weather started changing as well, so it was raining less. It's hard to believe in Wales, and it was like, oh, we could have actually gone out for a walk, but I couldn't walk around the house. Mm-hmm. So it made me feel like I was trapped. I was reflecting and thinking, actually, this is this because, coming up to, well, I'm 38, but I'm close to 40, and it was a thought like, oh, is this my body getting older? So it left me thinking about, is this the fittest I'm ever going to be? Mm. And I don't think that's correct, but in that moment, in that time where, after you complete Netflix and then you think there really is just, I felt pretty useless in that moment.
Yeah. And I think obviously injury and pain is going to make anyone feel awful. But I think that's really telling in terms of what you realized in that moment was, not only had you kind of over pushed and not respected your body, but that one of the things we have consistently used, certainly since the pandemic, but actually probably always, is we have something to discuss, we're stressed, we're upset, we're worried, we're sad, whatever, then generally we go for a walk. Yeah. And it was like that therapy almost had been taken off you as well. So you were feeling all of those things, and your normal tool was useless. You couldn't use it, which then kind of exasperated it.
Yeah, so it's something really precious to God, because if you're not able to move around, and in this instance it was a tool of feeling better, after going through some life obstacles, then it was something that was actually the highlight of a day. And when you can't have that at your disposal, then it becomes really difficult. And that I like to read a lot about the Stoics, and Epictetus would often like to go for a walk to clear his mind, and Seneca did as well. And I know that there's a really nice quote in your book from Seneca, and it was, we should take wandering walks so that the mind might be nourished and refreshed. And it's just nice to see that, you know, when you read that, it's like, this isn't new information. It's it's close to like 1,000 years old, maybe older.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the exact time when Seneca was about. But they knew back then that there was clarity and that nourishment in going out for a walk.
Exactly.
And it clears the mind. And it's a time where you can come up with ideas. It can be creative time as well.
So, in bringing it back to movement and mental health, let's imagine, like, we've both gone through emotional and health challenges and have used movement to deal with that. So I'll ask you first and then maybe ask me, like, if someone is listening right now and they're unwell, they physically can't do what they would normally do, they physically can't do that, what advice would you give that has kind of been helpful to you? What sort of things were you doing? If anyone's got back pain, they know how horrific it is, and just going to the bathroom is like an Olympic act. So what did you do to start to build up your physical resilience to then help your mental resilience?
Well, I think that idea of the only thing that was left in my control is recovering in the best way I possibly could. And when you sort of almost turn resting into an Olympic sport, it becomes, actually, this is the purpose of being able to get to that next step. So if you can't actually get out and do that movement outside or exercise or move your body, then what can you do to get to that point of being able to do that? And there may be countless steps. But for me, with back pain and sciatic pain, I went and saw a physio who gave me exercises to do. So what I did was I set an alarm on my phone every hour, because this was my focus at the time. This was what I needed to do in order to get back to how I wanted to be. So I set an alarm for every hour to do these exercises. But it was between like 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. And every hour I would stop whatever I was doing. And as that got better, you know, we were walking around the supermarket and I would stop and do some hamstring stretches just in the fruit and veg aisle. And it was my priority to do that exercise. I then made sure that, okay, well, I'm doing that. What else can I do? And we researched, and we could do some red light therapy. So found, and we got a body wrap that sent red light to that area to reduce inflammation. So then it became a part of my routine to do that twice a day. Mm-hmm. I also had a heat pad and a cold pack that was kept in the fridge. So then that was done. And what I did was I started to create a very sort of strict protocol, and that I did every single day in order to recover in the best way I possibly could.
And what did that do to your mental health once you started doing that?
This gave me so much focus, because then I started to understand, okay, well, what was the other reasons why I had that sciatic pain? Okay, I loaded up the rucksack. Okay, well, it might have been that I was wearing a rucksack that didn't support my body right. So, okay, I mean, forgetting about doing that again. But the weight was actually what the military use. That it was a pretty standard weight. It was very heavy, but it was standard. Okay, so that is what a fit, healthy person could do. So where was I lacking? So then I tried to address areas of my body that weren't strong enough. So when I went to the physio, he then explained to me that I had weak glutes. So he then gave me another exercise to do in order to strengthen my glutes, because then that was important to strengthening my lower back. Mm-hmm. I also looked at, okay, so at the time, from sort of last summer to now, I gained some excess weight, and I knew that my upper body weight was putting strain on my lower back. Well, this is all contributing factor. This is, addressing why I had this injury. I then looked at I looked
everything that led to it,
everything that was contributing factor. So there was so many things that were out of my control, like being able to move, and being able to, even do the dishwasher. But then I had to look at everything that I could possibly do. It all comes down to what you can control and what you can't control. And I looked at everything that I could control. That is where I made the change. That was my focus. And that led to a speedier recovery.
Yeah, awesome. I think I think it's a different podcast, so for another time, but I think really interesting to start to kind of bring attention to the fact of one thing never really causes a kind of a whole kind of host of problems. There's always so many things that lead up to it. And I know we both feel that and believe that and experience that. And it's so nice and interesting to hear, like, almost how you unpicked it all. It's like there was that obvious cause of carrying the rucksack, but actually what led to that, and unpicking all of the physical and emotional reasons. And people might kind of go, how is there an emotional reason to that? But there is, and we've worked it out, and we've kind of worked out that you were emotionally carrying a lot that was burdening you as well. And so it's a really interesting thing for us to perhaps look at in the future, is kind of unpicking that, because I think that'll relate to so many people.
That's right. And there's so much more detail that I could go into about the protocols that were set up, which we will save for another show. But I'd love to hear your experiences, because mine was really obvious. I carried a big rucksack and knackered myself out. But
some would say you are an idiot, but who am I to say that?
Most people have. So, but I know that your experiences with that and exercise and movement when it comes to mental health is totally different. Not in the same way that it is for me.
Yeah, I think my experiences are different. I think perhaps it's kind of useful to understand, first of all, that if we are in chronic stress, so if we've got something stressful going on in our life which feels very inescapable, then our brain wants us to deal with it in the same way as it would if you're being chased by a tiger, right? And there's several different responses that your brain can give you, called the 5 F's of stress, but 2 which are really crucial in terms of movement is when we're chronically stressed, what we will often do is freeze. So that feeling of, I've got so much stress, I just don't know where to go, and I'm just going to do nothing, I'm going to stay here. So the freeze response is often what is prohibiting us from moving, because we just feel so stressed. It's the last thing that we want to do. Another one of those stress response is the flight response, right? So the tiger's chasing me, so I'm going to run for my life. And interestingly, the flight response is a human being's preferred response to stress, because generally, if I run away from it, I've got much more chance of surviving than if I try and fight it. But that also explains why so many people will use running, going to the gym, anything that kind of gets them into that flight response, where you're out of breath and you're physically exhausted, as a way of stress control. So over the last few years, I've gone through quite a lot emotionally and physically. So emotionally, I have actually stopped counting, but I know there's more than 6 bereavements in some way or another. So I've lost very significant people in my life, and all of that has come with its own heartache and trauma and grief and agony and emotional pain. And some of it I've talked about publicly, and some of it I haven't. The problem with that is that, as many people will know, is when you start grieving, one grief compounds another. So when you have multiple losses in a row. It's just kind of constantly opening the wound. So emotionally, I've gone through a lot. And then when we then try and carry on as normal, or we try and do stuff, what happens is we kind of bury it down, we put on a front, and then we end up feeling it more physically because we've not processed it. We've not let it out of our body, for want of a better phrase. And so a few years ago, I became quite chronically ill with a stomach problem, which just didn't get resolved. And at one point was being suspected to be Crohn's, which is a horrific condition. And my heart goes out to anyone suffering with Crohn's because it's horrible. And that's a lifelong chronic condition. And it actually at one point also mentioned to be cancer. And both terrifying suggestions, both things I definitely did not want to have to face. And so as I was exploring the conventional medical route, I was also exploring the more unconventional route, I guess, doing things like acupuncture and seeing a herbalist and all sorts of different things, because as many people will know, when you're feeling chronically ill, you kind of will try anything. And going through all of that, my mental health suffered massively. I was still burdened with all of the losses and actually still had more losses to come. And I was still trying to be normal and present myself to the world in a way that I guess other people wouldn't have known what was happening. And I was going through a lot of physical distress. So my diet became highly limited, and I lost a lot of weight, and there was a lot of different challenges going on. And so for me, what I did in that time, because I felt, as you explained, Tom, with your back, totally out of control. And I felt like I was almost a victim to this mystery condition and was taking parts of me away almost day by day. The way that I decided to take control was I decided to treat everything as an experiment. And so that involved, does this food make me react? Really simple. And then it involved, okay, well, I'll try a course of acupuncture. How do I feel on the back of that? I'll try this, I'll try that. And a big part of that experiment became movement. When you're chronically ill and you're not eating very much, your energy levels are super low. So moving is, especially in that chronic stress phase, something you don't really want to do. You just feel like, oh my goodness, I've got this tiny bit of energy. I don't want to almost waste it on movement. But I decided that I was going to do an experiment, and I was going to try and walk at least 5, 6, 4, 9 steps every day and see how I felt. And that started to have a huge impact on me. So along with loads of other things, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a different podcast, but the movement element to that started to help me loads, because actually one of the things I noticed very quickly was when I'm walking, the stomach pains I was having were a lot easier. So the movement for me was actually really helpful. When I was walking, I was also getting that green benefit of being out and seeing the different seasons, even if it was raining, still seeing stuff. When I was walking, generally I either would listen to a podcast or I was walking with you, and we would talk and process things in a way that perhaps you don't do quite as much in the house, because it's a little bit more focused. And so that kind of has stuck, and I've kind of evolved with it. But that really is my go-to mental health tool. And I have loads of tools, obviously, with the work that we do. I've gathered probably thousands over the years. But going for a walk has absolutely become one of the most important tools I have, whether I'm mentally ill or mentally down, I would say, sorry, or physically down. Is if I have the physical capacity. Obviously, if you're really physically unwell, you need to save your energy for healing and recovering. But if it's a chronic condition, getting those bits of movement in throughout the day, and sometimes they were just 2 very short walks rather than 1 longer walk, but that massively helped my mental health and is something that I really treasure now. And when you were struggling with your back, obviously I stayed with you and helped you because you were struggling with the most basic of things. And I noticed my mental health suffering because of being in with your back, because I wasn't able to use that. I don't know, sometimes I feel like perhaps we're all a little bit like a Labrador inside, and we get that kind of caged up feeling, and we need like, I just need to go and let off some steam. And I
Yeah,
think, I guess, coming all the way back to our conversation about the Apple Watches, or, those sorts of things, I think that's what I've definitely learned, is to be more in tune with myself and my body and my mind, and recognize what it needs rather than something telling me what it needs.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's the key takeaways when it comes to, watching all of this back, is finding out what works for you, finding out that element that you really enjoy when it comes to movement, and something that you feel that makes you better. Because you might try the gym and you might think, well, this is rubbish, or you might get a road bike and go out cycling. You might think this is the best thing ever. And it's all about finding what brings you that mental clarity,
Yeah.
that thing that will give you focus and flow. And that might be doing it with a friend, that might be doing it by yourself. It doesn't matter. You just got to find out what works for you. So I think that there is still so much more that we could talk about on this topic, and I'm sure that we will in future episodes. But during Mental Health Awareness Week, which is the 13th of May to the 19th of May 2024, you will expect to see more social posts, practical guides, tips, and helpful things from us at Beam if you follow our socials. If you need any further support on any of the topics that we've discussed, then please reach out. You can book a free call with either myself or Lianne. The links for all of those things will be in the description, even an email as well if you just wanted to contact us. And we look forward to hearing about you, sort of delivering more of these sessions. And one sort of last point that I wanted to add was, we have got plenty of topics that we would like to talk about from our experience in what we do at Beam. But if there is anything that any of our listeners, watchers, audience would like us to cover, then just drop us a message, and we would love to include topics like that in future sessions. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. We've really enjoyed doing it, and I hope you have a great week.